Hi, this is Matthew, and together with my co-host Andrew, we produce the podcast Still Unbelievable. Still Unbelievable started life as a response project to the podcast and book Unbelievable, which has hosted discussions between Christians and non-Christians for almost 2 decades. On Still Unbelievable, we review Christian arguments and interview a variety of guests to shine a light on the darker side of Christianity, the parts that Christians prefer to ignore. So if you want to challenge the things that Christians say, and occasionally have a laugh about it too, find us in your favourite podcast provider by searching for Still Unbelievable.
Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
Hey everybody, welcome to part 2. I'm so glad to be continuing this conversation with Rachael and Molly from the Cheers to Leaving podcast. So welcome now to MindShift podcast.
Woo! It's
Yes.
nice over here.
The water's warm.
No, we got baptized in a freezing cold river, remember? Or a lake or whatever it
Yeah,
was.
you guys didn't have heated. I don't think I've ever been
We were
baptized
not
in a
privileged.
heated anything.
You weren't privileged.
No.
Well, we've
Anyone
had
who
a great
gets-
conversation. Yeah.
Anyone who's been baptized in a heated baptismal, you know what? Your church had money.
Well, yeah, my church must have had money then, but we built the building ourselves. Did that count? So they saved loads of money by tapping church members to do all the work.
I was gonna say
So, we do have that going for us.
they have
Do
a
you
bunch of
remember those-
volunteers.
Yep.
Do you remember those like offering services where they'd be like, and today's offering, they just saying they're special. They'll be like, and today's
Special
offering is
Give us your
going
money.
after you've given your money. They decide to tell you this. It's going
Yeah.
to the new roof.
Yeah, we need a new roof. We need a new parking lot, whatever it is. Yeah, so hopefully you've caught part 1. You should have caught part 1. I would say if you haven't, you got to stop this recording and get over to the Cheers to Leaving podcast because we've just done part 1 on their show, and this is now part 2. We're continuing this discussion. We got into all kinds of subjects. We were talking about baptism, how many times. So you've both been baptized at least twice. I've been baptized 3 times, but Rachael, you might have beaten us all, actually.
Yeah, I blacked out. I don't know. Again, when you have baptisms once a week at a lake and you're
Are you
a young
serious?
child,
Once a week?
How many
I mean,
converts
I-
did your church have?
not
My
a
God.
lot. There
How
was
many
a
people
time where, like,
was your
it
pastor
bigger than
saving?
others.
It's the same
Again,
people
I was
every
a
week.
child, so my memory could be off.
It's a bit
but
blurred.
It felt like at least in the summertime it was often. Like I can just remember there was many instances where we would go to the lake, and so if you want to jump in, you can. It's like, hey, who wants to get baptized? Type thing. Like we'd usually go out there for 1 or 2 people, and the pastor would be like, anyone else? And I'd be like, okay.
Yeah, no,
Go on in.
we were cheap. We just were like, okay, like once a quarter and baby pool in the garage, or like I said, like the old gas tank that got cut in half in the garage. Like that's what we did.
Amazing.
So we were cheap on that.
But the thing is, what's the theology behind it? Because we were discussing this a little bit. Is it okay to be sprinkled? Is it okay to be baptized as a baby? Like
There's
in
a squirt gun.
Yeah. So, because that's a big deal. Because I mentioned I came out of the Church of Christ denomination, which taught that to get saved, you got baptized. That was they equated salvation and baptism.
Right.
And they
My
would
church
say
did
it was in the
not.
Baptistic tradition. So it was full immersion adult baptism.
Yeah,
if you were
so-
baptized as a baby, like as a Catholic, it didn't count. So
Yeah.
it can be a pretty big deal if you even get into heaven.
We were Southern Baptist, and so the belief was there wasn't like an age necessarily, like as long as you could like make up your own mind and like think for yourself somewhat. So like when I was
Can
like
a 9-year-old think for themselves?
I don't know. I was like 5 or 6 when I
Too
first
young.
got baptized. So
No,
I had no idea
yeah.
what was going on.
Your
I
brain
like
isn't
asked Jesus
developed.
into my peanut butter sandwich, like that was the vibe.
Mm-hmm.
So but it was like full body submersion. Either pastor or the body of Christ had to baptize you. it didn't necessarily mean you were saved, but it kind of solidified your ticket to heaven. So it was like, this is like, you need to have this for us to really be like, consider
It
you
is
to be
important, I guess.
serious. Like, if you didn't get baptized, it was like, well, why aren't you getting baptized?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah. It was like
But
almost
that's-
like you would want to proclaim to the world that you're a Christian, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of what you need to do.
Public statement. Well, and this is a good question to throw at this point. We kind of hinted around this in on your show, and that is this whole issue of religious trauma syndrome, because what triggered me to get baptized in the first place was after we had shown A Thief in the Night at our church in the mid 1970s, and I was terrified that I was going to get left behind in the rapture, and I wanted to get baptized so that didn't happen, so I wouldn't go to hell. I wouldn't have to face the tribulation. Now, looking back on it as an adult, I would say that is absolutely a form of abuse. The indoctrination of children, telling them terrifying things, like, because I can remember when I was 5 or so going to vacation Bible school weirdly enough, at a neighbor's house down the street, not at a church, and they had flannel graphs and everything. And on the last day, they went into the whole thing about, you're going to go to hell, you're going to burn in the flames. I'm 5 years old. Then that's a form of abuse. My religious
That's
trauma
also, like,
syndrome, I would say it
extremely
started there.
normal.
That's messed
Yeah.
up.
It is messed up, but it's also like extremely normal for everyone as like that grew up evangelical. Like,
Yeah.
it's more it freaks me out more looking back on it than it like did at the time. Like, you
Yeah.
know, like it was just
It's
very
normalized.
normal conversation that you would have with your parents or the church or whatever. And now looking back, I'm like, why would you tell a child that? What the fuck?
I think
It's the truth. That's
I
what they
didn't
would
really
say.
have like a fear of hell because I kind of just assumed I wasn't going. Even though I was like
Well,
a bare
I mean, I did
minimum
too.
Christian. I was a bare minimum Christian, but like
Yeah.
I was like, oh, like my family is Christian and I have all the right doctrine and I got baptized and like, yeah,
Like,
I
I'm
believe
probably
this.
good.
So yeah,
One
I'm
of them
good. Like I
coattail
didn't-
Christians.
yeah, I didn't really want to like think about it too hard because if I thought about it too hard, I did get anxiety. But like, I don't remember feeling like super terrified of hell. There was like a couple conversations I had with my mom as a really little girl where I was like, "Well, if Grandma's not a Christian, does that mean Grandma's going to hell?" And my mom's like,
Yeah.
"Unfortunately,
That was also
yes,
traumatizing.
that is what that
Yeah.
means."
She's going to be burning in hell. Well, and that's the
Yep.
thing, is you've got all this trauma from being indoctrinated as a kid. Now, what you mentioned, Molly, that you had some of the Bill Gothard Institute and Basic Life Principle stuff. That's what I was raised with. Back then, it was called Institute and Basic Youth Conflicts. What was your experience, Rachel? Were your parents into any of that stuff, the Gothard cult stuff?
Yeah. So as I was watching Shiny Happy People, I was like, a lot of this is so familiar, but it wasn't presented to me in the way that it was almost like second or third hand, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it had
Like,
filtered in. I think a lot of his stuff just filtered into evangelicalism.
Yeah, but I didn't necessarily realize that it was the Pearls or it was Bill Gothard. You know, I didn't realize that's where it stemmed from, but so much of it was very familiar to me. And I can't even think of the name right now, but I think it was one of the last episodes. I think it was the 4th episode where there were certain curriculums that,
Oh, ATI?
I don't know.
Well, you weren't
have to-
homeschooled, were you?
Yes, I was.
Oh, right.
We used Bob Jones.
Oh, BJU
And-
Press.
I
Yes,
did
but then we
do
also
Bob
used
Jones.
Abeka,
Yeah.
which was also a big one amongst Christians. And then
But
there was another one. Sunlight was our curriculum, which was like a Christian based,
SON.
and it was a white supremacist, like American nationalism.
Oh,
Like,
nice.
Like when I look back at some of the books we read, I was like, holy shit.
This is
what-
really messed
we were
up.
learning what but like we didn't know. Okay, so my dad was so anti Bill Gothard because we were from Illinois, and so he was very familiar with that. He hated Jerry Falwell, he hated all those guys. He was like, I'm a liberal Christian, you know, like so he would like vote Democrat and all of this. But they did use Michael and Debbie Pearl's parenting and marriage books quite heavily in the way that they raised us. And a lot of the IBLP parenting style stuff was very deep in our house church. Like a lot of the people in our house church were quiverful families and had come from those super fundamentalist churches. And so they saw as like our house church was kind of cutting edge and like little bit more liberal at the time.
Progressive.
Right. But like all of the same parenting methodologies were being used, a lot of the same ways that women were treated and expected to behave. Like that was all very normalized, and it was all based in like Bill Gothard and the Pearls and like Christian fundamentalism. Like it's all
We
the
got
same
Dobson in there
shit.
too.
Yeah,
See,
Dobson,
I would equate
yeah.
Dobson right in there because he taught
My parents listened
corporal
to Dobson
punishment and spanking as well.
constantly.
Yeah, it's all the same.
They read
It's all the
his
same
books, all of
shit,
that.
which is
Yeah.
like a different name. And so it's funny. I brought it up to my dad recently because Shiny Happy People came out, and I was like, I think you should watch it. And I was like, this is a lot of the parenting methodologies were very reminiscent of what we used at home. And that's where a lot of my religious trauma stems from, is from the parenting methodologies that you guys had that were like steeped in this stuff. And he said something interesting. I think he has selective memory at this point, because he was like, oh, well,
course.
we would try things that were suggested to us by our community. And then, a lot of it we just realized just didn't fit our family. And so we would try different things. I'm like, that's not what my experience was.
Yeah, hang on a minute.
Maybe like after I was out of the house and you guys were like becoming more conscious of trauma,
Yeah, like maybe
and like
your younger siblings.
right. So I think like my young,
Exactly.
but even then, like I remember times when one of the youngest, she was like, they did this weird spanking ritual where she was lying a lot. Like lying was just like part of her freaking personality at that age. She was like 7. And so she just lied about everything. Because she knew if she told the truth, she'd get a spanking anyway. So the Pearls suggested this thing where it's like every day at a certain time, you pick the time, but it has to be the same time every day. You are going to spank your child this many times. So it'd be like 10 spanks every day at 10 a.m.
Like a preemptive spank.
For 7 days. While they were, and if they stopped.
For the shit that you might do that day.
What the hell?
And if you lied again during this process, if you lied again, you'd have to start the 10 days over. And so she would like, it was like 30 days of spanking every day. God. And at one point she'd like, her job was to like bring my mom the rod and be like, it's time for my spanking. Like,
yeah,
that shit is weird.
Trauma
it's
right
so
there,
weird, dude.
Yeah.
And I was just like, in 8th grade being like, this is normal. Like,
no,
exactly.
yeah, I
It becomes
decorated
normalized.
my rod.
you decorated it.
You decorated it?
Yeah.
Okay, that is messed up.
Be like, here, we decorate
And my mom
the
thought
weapon
it was
that we're
the
going to
most
use against
adorable thing ever.
you. Oh my God.
She would tell people about it.
Did she also
Now that I
tell
look
people
back
when
on-
she'd break the rod on your butt? Because it was like a funny family story. Of
She
like,
did.
oh my God, I've broken
within
4
those
rods
circles,
on Molly.
She'd be like, wow,
She's that
I hit her
bad.
so hard that, or it just wore out. It's time for new spanking spoon.
Oh my God. Like looking back on it, it's like, this was weird, y'all.
What? Why would you say that? Here's
It's
the
so messed up.
spoon that my mom beats me with. I decorated it. And I think I even titled it Rachel's Spanking Spoon.
Rachel,
My
no.
God. No, please say it isn't true.
Rachel,
It
this
is
is
so-
bad. Have you talked to your
That is
therapist
so
about
bad.
the spanking spoon yet?
I haven't actually.
You might want to
We
bring
just
that
brought
one
up a
up.
whole new memory.
I think a lot of these things are like suppressed, and then we get on the podcast or we do
They
interviews
come
and
out.
we
It's
start
true.
talking,
Like,
and I'm like,
what the hell?
I remember that.
I
Yeah.
recently had a sibling reach out to me because they watched Shiny Happy People.
Mm-hmm.
And I was, we had a big family, 7 kids. I was the middle child, and I struggled the most, probably the most on the autism spectrum. Like very neurodivergent, just would have like meltdowns all the time. And so I got spanked a lot because, you want to suppress the emotion. So if the kid is showing emotion, you need to spank that out of them. And so I received the majority of the punishment, a big majority of it. And my older sister reached out to me when Shiny Happy People came out, and she goes, there were certain parts of this show that were really triggering to me. And she goes, and it wasn't even just my trauma that I was feeling it was yours. And she reminded me of this time when I was really young. And like, this memory is like deeply engraved in me. Like, this is not something I've suppressed. I'm like, yeah, that happened. I'm never forgetting that.
Yeah,
I was really
it's
little.
there.
I was like 4 or 5, just a really tiny little kid. And I was having a meltdown, and it turned into my dad taking me into the basement for like 3 hours, and periodically like on the hour, like spanking me me a certain number of times until I showed no emotion. And I remember just like
I have a memory
hiding
like that too.
behind a bookcase, and like I was like sobbing uncontrollably. Like my nervous system was
As you
so
do.
unregulated that like he thought it would be a smart idea to take a picture of me so that I could see my face when I was crying, so I could be
like
shamed.
a weird form of like,
Good
It was like
God.
shame punishment to try to get me to stop crying. Like, yeah, that's going to help your baby regulate. I'm a baby, like 5 years old. And I'm like, I remember standing behind the bookcase and just, and like looking out, and my dad turning around with the camera and like whipping around in his chair with the camera and being like, I'm going to take a picture of you if you come out. And I was down there for
Good God.
the whole day, the whole like half of the day. And, you know, and then when I went upstairs, I'd like finally gained enough self-control. Went upstairs and I had to like apologize to my mom and apologize to my grandma and apologize to all my siblings. And my older sister reminded me of this, and she goes, I remember Dad taking you down there, and I remember hearing you screaming and crying and all of the spanking. And she's like, I remember wanting to stop it and not knowing how. And I was like, Beth, this isn't yours to hold. I was like, you were in it as much as I was. Had you stood up for me, had you tried to save me, had you tried to do anything, you would have been subjected to far worse than what I was undergoing. You know, yes, what I was going through was horrible. But you would have been punished much more harshly had you tried to step in. And so we all kind of had like a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome and a little bit of like, everyone stay in their lane, everyone mind their business, don't, you know, step in. And I knew that at a young age, like my siblings aren't going to be able to save me, and I'm not going to expect them to, if that makes sense.
That's seriously messed up. That's just
Right.
straight abuse, isn't it? On every possible level.
Yeah.
Physical, emotional, I would say spiritual too.
For
That's
sure.
one thing.
Yeah.
As I was writing my book, I went through a lot of that because we talk about the Gothard stuff. My parents raised us according to Bill Gothard's teachings, and we were spanked sometimes 2, 3, 4 times a day, you know, and it was to break our wills. That was what they taught, wasn't it? They said you had to, and when the child starts to cry, that's when you know that he or she, their will has been broken. And that when the tears start to flow. And I can remember sitting in my room, hearing my sister Beth getting spanked and knowing I was next, you know, and it's that same thing. There was nothing I could do to stop it. Yeah. I'm in dread and anxiety waiting because I know it's my turn, and I can hear her just down the hall, sobbing, crying, getting hit, you know, spanked on the butt. So that's another trauma on top of the abuse as well, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, you always have to remember too, like, corporal punishment has been like so normalized for years and years and years. And it's not just inside of religion. Yes, religion really pushed it even further. But like, gosh, like even like Little House on the Prairie, like there's like a chapter where Laura gets a spanking, and like but it only happened maybe twice in her whole lifetime, right? And she really did something bad to warrant it. And like even my friends, when I tell them about this stuff, they're like, yeah, I remember being whooped like once or twice when I was a kid, and that I did something real bad to deserve it. And it, you know,
we had hundreds, thousands.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh yeah,
1 or 2.
It was like regular. It was like a regular part of our day. Was one of us was going to get our ass whooped, and it was going to be intense. And yeah, like I don't know, it's just different when it's like so.
Well, that was the go-to
constant
punishment. There like really wasn't anything.
There wasn't anything else.
I think that there maybe, I don't know. I feel like when the younger you were till, I don't know, maybe up until you were close to being a teen, that was like just the point where they had to shape you and train them up in the way that they should go. And so I think that's why spankings were so like implemented during that time. But I remember, I mean, I don't even know how many I got, like so many.
Oh yeah. Thousands.
And yeah. Again, like normal average people are like, yeah, maybe I've had like one my whole life. Yeah. And I'm like, oh wow. So you're probably okay now.
Yeah, or it was ritualized every day for 10 days till I stopped lying. And if I lied in the middle of it, it'd be we'd start the 10-day cycle.
Start it over. Right. Yeah, and that's almost psychological, I feel like.
It is.
Well, it's
like,
torture,
I mean, obviously physical, it, you know, obviously, but like, I feel like when, like, say you mess up, right, as a child, you often do, to just restart that and then having this dreaded fear of doing anything, because if you do, it's just going to keep going and keep happening.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I was talking about when we did our other episode on your show, where I'm writing my book, as I'm reliving these memories, I was plugging in examples of cult psychology, cult practices and tactics that I lived through. And one of the things I kept coming up with was Dr. Stephen Hassan's BITE model. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Have you heard of the BITE model of cults?
Can you explain it?
So what it is, it's an acronym. It stands for BITE: behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control.
Yes, I have.
And it's a really effective model to explain how cults and cult leaders control and manipulate their followers. So we've identified several, haven't we? We've talked about behavior control. You had to control your behavior, and it was controlled for us by spankings and corporal punishment and other forms of punishment. We also had information control, whereby we had no television, we had no radio in the house, we were shielded from the world, we couldn't watch TV and all that. We had to control our thoughts, because you could sin against God with a bad thought. And then, of course, we had to control our emotions, which, I mean, Molly, you were describing being punished for an entire day to get your emotions, quote, under control. All those things hit all four markers of that model, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. So what was the form of punishment your parents chose to use? This is like for both of you after you were like past the spanking point. My parents did like intense grounding and isolation. So it was like, instead of spankings, I'm now getting like frequently grounded for like weeks on end, where I cannot leave my room other than to use the bathroom and do my chores. Like, and because I was homeschooled, it was like,
right.
CPS isn't going to come in and be like, yeah, your kid has like been isolated to a room.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wasn't grounded. There was a lot of stuff that went down where when I was about 10, 11, my older sister Valerie got pregnant when she was 17, 18. She was forced to give the baby up for adoption. That was hugely traumatic. And after all that kind of went down, my parents, they relaxed a little bit, in the sense I think they were just burned out, because there was 6 of us kids, and my sister Beth and I were the 2 youngest. I was the youngest of all of them, and she was just a little bit older than me. So
they were tired.
Yeah, they were just tired of all the, spankings and battles and everything that they'd had with all my other sisters. So we got accused when my older sisters, they looked back and they said, "You guys were spoiled. You were absolutely spoiled." And I'm like, no, I think our parents were just burned out,
Yeah.
I say that to my youngest.
And that was all that kind of thing.
My youngest sister like got away scot-free. She didn't get beat to a pulp. I think my dad spanked her one time. I think my mom spanked her maybe twice her whole life. Like, she just got away with everything. The youngest, like
the baby of the family.
Yeah. By the time they were like old enough to like talk about stuff like religious trauma, I mean, they still identify as a Christian. So I'm like, okay, you obviously didn't have the most traumatizing experience ever. Like, you got to go to high school. You weren't being homeschooled on a Christian curriculum. Like,
spanked and beaten.
Yeah, spanked and beaten. You had a good relationship with our father. Like, what?
Yeah. We'll be right back in just a few minutes in the second half of this chat with Rachael and Molly from the Cheers to Leaving podcast. If you haven't figured this out by now, this is part 2. You can catch part 1 of our great conversation that we had over on their platform. I would highly recommend that you listen to that first before you listen to this one, although this is right in the middle now. So if you listen this far, you might as well keep going. Then head over to Cheers to Leaving and go ahead and catch part 1. Now, speaking of Rachael and Molly, we've just had, as this episode drops on the 24th of September, they were our guests on our monthly MindShift Zoom call. We've just started these back up in the month of September, and I've absolutely enjoyed meeting these 2 lovely ladies, these ex-evangelicals. We obviously have a lot in common, sharing our backstories growing up in sort of fundamentalist Christianity, religious trauma syndrome, rapture anxiety, being baptized multiple times, and more. You can still catch that conversation, though, if you go to patreon.com/MindShift podcast. The recording of that call will be posted up on Patreon, so you can still catch that. And in fact, these are rewards that you get for being a Patreon supporter of the show. You can drop in every month to our MindShift Zoom calls. We hold them usually around about the 3rd Sunday of the month. In fact, we've got the month of October lined up already. I've got David Morris, who I just had a conversation with the other day. He is a book publisher out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. He used to work for Zondervan. That episode's going to be dropping soon, so he's agreed to come and be our guest in the month of October. and I'm working on one more for the month of November before we take our break for the rest of the year. So these are fantastic benefits to being a Patreon supporter of the show. Then we've got a couple of really good interviews lined up just to let you know what's in the pipeline. I've got a couple of really good friends of mine, a couple of ex-pastors just like me. We've got a conversation with Tim Sledge, who of course wrote the book Goodbye Jesus, as well as numerous other books on atheism and agnosticism. We're going to be talking about his book, 4 Disturbing Questions with One Simple Answer, Breaking the Spell of Christian Belief. That is a fantastic book that I would highly recommend. We're going to be getting into that. Then I've also got another call lined up, or I will be lining it up with another good friend of mine, David Hayward, the Naked Pastor. We need to catch up with these guys. It's been a long time since I've talked to both David and Tim. And then I've also got a recording scheduled with Karen North. She is a former evangelical missionary in Japan, growing up there in fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. She's written a book called Holy Heathen. I'm really looking forward to talking to her. Then I'm working on another interview with Dr. Laura Anderson. I've had her on the show before, so I'm really looking forward to catching up with Laura again. She's just come out with a book called When Religion Hurts You. So again, talking about religious trauma syndrome, the damage that evangelicalism can cause. And then speaking of damage that is caused by evangelicalism, specifically the Christian right, I've got an interview lined up with my good friend Peter Montgomery of the Right Wing Watch. I haven't talked to him in a long time, so I'm really interested to see what work Peter has done. Again, he's doing a lot of work on Right Wing Watch's website about stuff that the Christian right, the fundamentalist Christians involved in American politics, what they're doing. So we'll have a catch up with Peter Montgomery. So again, some absolutely fantastic episodes coming up. Got some really good interviews lined up. Really looking forward to talking to all these great people. So let's get on back into the second half of our chat with Rachael and Molly as we conclude part 2 of our crossover episode, MindShift Podcast, and cheers to leaving.
Mine did like sitting on the wall or holding positions for a long period of time until I was like shaking or
That's
crying
horrible.
or something.
My
you
God,
know what I mean?
that's horrifying.
That's what they do in the
Yeah,
army.
so I'd like
and,
have to sit on the wall until like I just literally couldn't sit there anymore. And since my will was strong,
Yep.
I would
You
fucking
weren't
stay
broken.
on that wall a long time.
You have some
Whether it was,
strong ass thighs.
the dead bug where you just have to lay on the fucking floor with your arms and legs up in the air. It's so weird
Planking.
to talk about.
It's
We
really
had to-
weird.
Mhm.
One time, me and my little
Almost
sister
like
were fighting,
exercises.
and my dad was like, "You're gonna sit in that tile square, and you're gonna sit in that tile square. And if I see your toes or fingers come out of the tile square, you're getting a spanking." And we just like sat there huddled in a ball for like an hour.
God.
Jesus.
That's kind of funny
That's
punishment. That's like less traumatizing punishment. That was just
I
like
think
funny
it's
How to
and
get
annoying.
creative.
Yeah, it's more
Like
creative
I
than
don't
whooping.
know what it does to your brain, but like
It's just like, okay.
it is weird. It's really
But
strange.
you're right. You have to tailor your punishments for the child's sort of psychology and behavior patterns, because we've got 2 girls and they were so different. They are so different. One's very strong-willed. The other's she was more passive as a child. So we found out, we stopped spanking them when they were probably 5 or 6. We just didn't believe it. Probably because of my experience as a kid. We weren't spanking them 5-6 times
Well,
a
you
day.
probably saw it made no improvement either on their behavior. Like,
Yes, and that's the thing. I'm reflecting on that, saying if my parents were spanking us thousands of times and we still were, quote, naughty, wouldn't you as a parent say, wait a minute, this isn't working.
isn't working.
This strategy isn't friggin' working. So me and my ex-wife at the time, well, we were married years ago when we raised our kids in the States, we would send them to their room and do things like that, make them sit on the naughty step and things, it wasn't spanking them. And our oldest daughter, she hated it because she's a very social person,
was
so
like, time
for
out,
her to
you
be
can't
sent to
talk
her
to me.
room was like the worst
like, "No."
punishment. My youngest daughter, she's very much like me. She likes being alone. So she never saw it as a punishment. She's like, I get to go play with my toys for an hour. Great. This is great.
I'll be honest, when I was a teenager and I was getting grounded a lot, I didn't mind it that much because it meant I didn't have to be around my siblings. I didn't have to sit at the dinner table where my dad drilled me with questions. I didn't have to go to family worship every morning. But the thing that made me mad was I couldn't go to ballet class and like have my extracurricular like outside of the house. So my one outlet outside of the house I couldn't do. But I'm really introverted myself. And so I would just like do all my schoolwork and then just like read fiction for hours. And like I loved that. Like when the pandemic came along, I was like, oh, this is lockdown? Psh, I've been doing this since I was a kid. Like, this ain't a big deal, But like, I wonder if my introversion was learned introversion because I'm a very like sociable, bubbly person for the most part. Very I like to make conversation, like to get to know people. But I do have this level of introversion. Like if I'm going through something emotionally difficult, I isolate myself. And I wonder if that's a result of the way that I was punished and taught to regulate. Was you're behaving very badly. You know, obviously me behaving badly was me having a need that wasn't being met, right? If you're like talking about it on a nervous system basis. Yeah. I'm acting out, you know, rebelling against their religion and stuff. But like now as an adult, when I'm going through something difficult, it's like my immediate response is I need to be by myself. I need to isolate. I don't want to be around anybody. I don't want to do anything. Like I ground myself almost like I give myself a disciplinary action when I'm in my room on my bed for days. Yeah. And like, I really wonder if that's learned. Like, would I regulate differently in the world if I had been taught emotional regulation skills, like in that gentle parenting, for instance, show, or if I had been just validated in the way I felt, maybe I'd be more willing to talk to friends when I'm going through something, you know?
It's true. I think that's right. I do the same kinds of things. You know, if there's a big gathering of people, it's weird because I'll have no problem talking to a stranger in a store or in a pub or something like that. But when it's a big group, I get very intimidated. I'm a teacher by trade. It's different. When I stand up in front of my learners, I don't have that problem. I feel very confident teaching a class. So it's strange, isn't it? But I'll tend to just go upstairs and get on my iPad or something like that, or work on my computer. Whereas my girlfriend, she loves that. She loves big gatherings and big parties, and that's kind of her thing, you know. So I have to be careful I can't just take off and disappear every time there's a gathering. So yeah, I think that does go back to some of that kind of stuff, doesn't it?
You know, do you think that maybe you feel that way because in your past life, when you were a Christian, your association with big gatherings was Christian gatherings in which there'd be uncomfortable conversations, there'd be accountability, there'd be points where you had to share the wrongdoings you have done, and like you'd be put on the spot, and then a bunch of people would zone in on you and be like, you're not doing this right, and you're not doing this right, and this is what you should be doing. Like for me, my social anxiety with big groups, like I'm into like different like spirituality stuff, and there's certain circles I'm now like feeling more comfortable going to, but certain like gatherings like that in which everyone's sitting in a circle and sharing gives me the highest anxiety because it takes me back to house church days and the level of pressure that was put on me in those environments. So I'm curious if like you feel that way about gatherings because it's reminiscent of what other gatherings you went to when you were younger and how uncomfortable those were for you emotionally. And so now as an adult, you just like go into like avoidance, like your nervous system is like, nope, we're not going to even deal with this. This is danger.
Yeah, I'm just going to stay away.
Yeah, we're going to avoid. We're going to run away.
Yeah, I can remember those conversations, being in accountability groups and all that, going around the table, you know, talking about how you failed that week and you didn't, whatever it was you weren't supposed to be doing. How many times you read your Bible or you didn't, how many times you prayed that week, blah, blah, blah. You know, so I was part of pastoral accountability groups. I was part of lay people accountability groups. Yeah, so I can definitely, I've never thought of that, but that's a really good point. Those kind of gatherings. Well, and then this is the other question. If you're an introverted person, we were talking a little bit on your show, what about this whole idea of sharing the gospel in air quotes? Is that a problem, or was that a problem for you too when you were Christians? You had to force yourself out of your comfort zone?
Well, like what I said on our early conversation, I avoided it. I think there was only one time where I like shared the gospel. Other than that, like I avoided it like the plague. I'm super socially anxious when it comes to like scripted stuff, I guess. And it felt really scripted. It didn't feel authentic. So
I just force yourself to do it.
Yeah, I wasn't a fan. Also, I was like, this is my parents' job. It's not. I'm a kid. Like, why are
talk to my mom or dad?
Right. I'm not the missionary. I'm just their child.
What about you, Rachel? Did you have to do evangelism when you were a Christian?
Yeah, I mean, we did things like Backyard Bible Club and where we'd like witness to children, which is also gross now that I think about it. I mean, I was a child as well, a teenager, but we were like you know, we would go into rough neighborhoods or, you know, poor neighborhoods, and then we would put on these shows. And then, but I mean, I thought it was fun. I didn't really like the after part where there was a lot of pressure to convert children afterwards. Children are a lot easier to talk to than adults. I felt pressure with my family because I loved them and I didn't want them to go to hell, I guess. And I also thought it was very valiant of me to stand up for my faith, you know, as well. Like that gave me a high, I guess, as a young child as well. But I also
unapologetic for the gospel.
Yeah, you like feel good about yourself, or like you're doing, you know, the Lord's work, I guess. And then you can go and you can share it with people, and they'll be like, "Oh my God, you're so good! Like you're so great," you know.
Super Christian.
Yeah, but I was an only child for most of my life. I had a stepsister that would come every other weekend. So I do kind of attribute that to being introverted. I think I'm outgoing, but I think really my comfort zone is being alone. I do have extreme social anxiety. But I don't know. I think the shitty part about that, and then having evangelical parents, is like there was no one else to have the microscope on except for me. So I think in some areas, people who did have more siblings, I kind of am jealous of a little bit, because there was more, like they had more to keep track of versus just like you and this constant like eyes on you, I guess.
It's true. Yeah. Family dynamics. I mean, there was 6 of us, so it was a big family. You could get lost in the shuffle, I think, for sure. Cause I was the youngest child, and yet I was the only boy. So I was in a weird place because they never really treated me like the baby of the family. My sister Beth, who's just above me, she's got more of the classic baby symptoms, you know, of a typical baby of the family. And I think they treated her that way because she was the final girl and I was the only boy. So in a way, I was the firstborn son. So it's a really weird thing. But yeah, you can become the invisible child or whatever.
The pressure of boys in Christian families that are majority girls. Like my brother is the only boy amongst 7, and he's a middle child too. So he's like 4 years older than me. And like, I just remember the way my dad and mom would talk about him. Michael, our only son, our one and only, the only begotten son, the heir,
He'll continue our legacy.
Like already culture.
Carry on the legacy.
Right. Already culture has put so much pressure on like the firstborn son of any family. But like, okay, firstborn son and we're Christian. Oh my gosh. Like the level of pressure. The level of pressure he probably felt. And also like this big, like, you must protect your sisters at all costs. Like,
very patriarchal system, isn't it?
Yeah. So he definitely has a lot of that. But like, okay, so you being the only boy and seeing your sisters go through everything they went through, were you treated differently than they were?
Yeah, I definitely was. Like you said, kind of that talk of being the quote chosen one, or the one who's going to carry on the legacy of the family, blah, 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 you know. And I would say, going back to the Gothard stuff, you know, obviously it was a very patriarchal system. And so that's my parents patterned their marriage and their family rearing after that sort of principle.
So the girls obviously had to do a lot more of the housework, had to do a lot more of the emotional labor, had to, did you guys do buddy systems where like your older sisters were your parents essentially?
Yeah, I think so, because there was such an age gap between my 2 oldest sisters, and by the time they got down to the last couple, Beth and I, that they were kind of surrogate mothers in a way. You know, I used to say to my sisters, I only have one mother. You can't tell me what to do. You know, they would boss me around and all that. But yet, like you said, I was expected to do all the sort of, quote, manly chores. I had to mow the lawn. I had to chop the wood. I had to do all those kind of things, whereas my sisters did the housework, you know. So we did some of that, obviously, because there were so many of us. But yeah, I think I was treated differently in that regard for sure.
What about dating? Were you treated differently when it came to dating?
Well, again, I think it was
by the time you were dating, though, were your sisters?
Yeah, things were different then, because my parents had kind of relaxed a bit because they were so burned out, I think, of all the battles they'd fought.
Or just like the conversation around purity. Like, what was that? Like being a boy and watching your older sisters go through this kind of socialization around their sexuality and how
it was huge.
Yeah. So like, what was that like?
It was definitely part of the modesty culture, the Gothard stuff. because I remember my sister. Well, there's a couple things I can really remember. My oldest sister, when she was in Bible college, she lost her virginity, and she had gone to Bible college with the express aim of finding a good Christian, godly man to marry who was going to become a pastor. She was going to be a pastor's wife. It was the dream. She lost her virginity to this guy, and she was devastated. And I remember she came home and said, "That's it. You know, I've ruined the package. I've soiled forever."
Oh my
And she
God.
actually dropped out of Bible college, saying that
Oh my
she said
God.
that I was on God's plan A for my life, and now there is no plan B, C, D. I don't even know what I'm going to do. You know, so she was that devastated by losing her virginity that she was convinced that she'd ruined everything.
I have a sibling. I'm not going to say
So
which
fucked up.
sibling, but I have a sibling who lost their virginity in college and came back and was like in church on their knees, crying with their head in their
Wailing.
hands, wailing, begging for God's forgiveness. And you just see my parents and all the deacons surrounding them, like praying for their salvation because they had sex. A consenting
How
sex.
horrible.
Yeah,
I
it was
know.
just
Thing I want to do is a sin.
like watching that.
right.
being a young person, I remember writing in my diary, so and so lost their virginity in college, and I'm praying for them that they're, you know, gonna be able to find Jesus again and find their purity again, and blah blah blah. And then at the very end, I'm like, but like, is it really that big of a deal? Question mark.
Ooh,
No.
no.
like I'm like regurgitating everything I need to say in the end of the brain dump. I'm like, but wait a minute. Like, is it that
But
big of
this
a deal?
is so dumb.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we talked about like being in big families and being the only boy and watching your siblings like go through like this really strange socialization around purity and everything. I don't remember where I was going with this. Okay. I'm just going to like make something up here.
Dive in there.
How did you feel about purity culture by the time you were dating? And like,
Yeah.
did any of that follow you? Your parents were more relaxed when it came to dating by the time you were, like you had said, but what about that indoctrination?
Well, yeah, it runs very deep, doesn't it? I was definitely raised in the purity culture, modesty culture, and it was that whole thing about the women are sort of the seductresses. That was the Gothard teaching, wasn't it? The woman would set an eye trap. I remember going through when I watched Shiny Happy People just about a month ago, and I was triggered, I guess you could say, by all the stuff they were talking about. You know, it's like, oh my God, that's what I was raised with. You know, because we could go out and have dates and things, but my mom and dad would very seriously say, look, you know, you got to be really careful. You know, you don't want to slip up and have sex. And then when I did lose my virginity, I wasn't as devastated, but I really was not happy that I had made a big mistake. I was probably 20, 21, around in there. So I made it for quite a while.
Yeah,
but
actually,
I
that's
swore
really
I'd
good.
never make another mistake like that again, and you know, try to repent and all that.
I was 19. How old were you, Rachel?
You got to think about that one.
I do. I don't know. I started doing sexual things before I lost my virginity.
Me
so that's
too.
why I'm trying
Right.
to think.
I'd say 17. I started doing sexual things, but like
17,
we
yeah.
waited 2 years to have sex. The same guy waited
That's
2
pretty
years.
long.
I was probably
Yeah, well, we were both
18.
virgins.
Yeah.
You've got your whole life to wait if you're still a virgin.
That's
Once
right.
you're not a virgin, though.
It's game
Once
over.
All
once you're
bets
not
are
a virgin and you're
off.
out
You're like, well.
dating, you're like, oh yeah, we're fucking on the first night.
Yeah, that's it. We're straight in.
Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing. Like when I got divorced a few years ago, then met my girlfriend. We've been together a couple years now, you know, and that's been a complete revelation. The whole sexual piece around our relationship. We're not married. We're, quote, living in sin. I'm sitting in her bedroom right now
Oh my
recording this podcast.
gosh, you
you know.
heathen.
Scandalous.
Going
I
to
was
hell
obviously,
for sure.
I'm going to hell. That's what I tell her all the time. You're dragging me to hell for sure.
This is
But
your
you know,
fault. Blame the woman.
I never thought that would be an issue after I got divorced, but it was a big thing to work through. The feeling of, oh, you can have sex without feeling the shame and the guilt and all the pieces that used to go with it when we were evangelicals. And
Right.
that's been a huge part of my reconstruction process, is getting divorced and then finding someone else and then having a normal relationship that normal people have, you know, and I've had to rethink the whole thing.
My biggest.
You and your sorry.
Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay. Did you and your ex-wife now follow like was she a Christian, and did you guys follow that whole like purity culture thing?
No,
when
we
getting
had
married?
sex before we got married, and we felt really bad about that. We were
But you
married
were
for
still in the same like
Oh yeah, we were both
mindset.
raised in Christian schools, Christian homes.
And so you felt guilty about having sex before that, and
Yep.
then you
We thought we'd
get
ruined the
married.
package and blah blah blah. But we were married for over 30 years. I mean, it was a long
Shit.
time. Luckily for us, we both sort of deconstructed around the same time frame. So our split up had nothing to do with like her staying a Christian and me becoming an ex-evangelical. It was just it had run its course basically. But
Yeah.
the religious component did play a huge part in our eventual marriage collapsing because of all the years I spent in Bible college and seminary and ignoring my family, being a pastor and a Bible college teacher took a lot of time away from our marriage and family, so it did have a huge effect on the ultimate breakdown of my marriage, I would say.
Yeah. Which
It really does.
I'm sure is a lot to unpack, because on top of your own deconstruction, because there's your own personal dealings with that, but then to also realize this has affected your family and your marriage and possibly ruined that is probably just more layers of
more layers of trauma
more layers of trauma for sure.
It's true.
Deconstructing is hard too, even in a relationship, even if you both are deconstructing at the same time, or even because your ideas change, who you are changes, all of these things that you're just kind of going through that were a part of you for so long. I think it's just hard.
Oh yeah.
I'm so glad and grateful that I am not married while I'm going through this process.
Lucky you.
Yes, I am so happy not doing that. I think for me it was like the biggest point when it came to unlearning stuff I had been taught and had been so deeply ingrained in me was the relationship ladder thing that they teach you about in purity culture, and when it comes to courtship and dating, it's like, this is the way it should go. You should only date someone you think you can marry. And then when you start dating, the end goal is marriage. And, if he hasn't proposed within 2 years, red flag. And this isn't something that's just taught to Christian girls. This is taught to all society. Yeah. All of society has this. But for Christian women, it's kind
so
of
worse.
the only thing you have to live for. It's like, if you do not get married and start having children, you have failed as a Christian woman. You're not really serving God in the way that you've been built to serve God. And it's quite problematic. And so, you see a lot of young women rushing to the altar, pressuring their partners to get married. They're marrying the first guy they ever dated. They don't really know this guy well. They're still babies, literally 19, 18 years old, getting married so young.
Yeah, just kids.
And so I'm really grateful that the relationship I was in, that was okay, we probably should get married. Cause I was still I was no longer a Christian, having sex out of wedlock, but still under this, if we're dating, that means we should get married. You're committed. I'm committed to you. Why else would we not? We wouldn't date if I didn't want to marry you. It was
Where's
that
this
mentality.
going? What's the point?
Yeah. So I'm really glad that ended, and I've been able to just date to learn about relationships and learn about myself more and learn about this person that I'm attracted to, and not feeling this weird pressure of okay, when are you going to propose? Are you a viable husband?
Are you a good godly man?
I was thinking about it the other day, and I almost feel like the ideal time to get married would be mid to late 30s or early 40s. If there wasn't the factor of women not being able to have kids, right? If you want to have
freeze
kids.
your eggs.
Well, yeah, that's
adopt.
Or adopt. Yeah. But I was thinking about it just with all the changes you go through from your 20s and your 30s. It almost seems like you really come into yourself and who you are and know your needs and all this stuff. I feel closer to 40. So it almost makes sense. And you've gotten all your yayas out of the way that it's I don't know. I was just thinking about it.
I agree.
I was man, when is a good time to get married? Because I don't feel like it's 20s or 30s.
It's your mid to late 30s, I think. Or at least at a point where you've worked through a tremendous amount of your own trauma. You've got, you've done a lot of the life goals you've had for yourself. You've had lots of experiences. You know yourself deeply.
You really know what you want.
Yeah, you really know what you want. And I think like my goal now, because I'm at the point where like pretty much everyone is on their first marriage. I'm like waiting for the second marriage. Like,
that,
so
yeah.
I'm going to like, I'm skipping the first
I know someone my
marriage.
age who's already on their second marriage.
Right,
Yep.
right.
So.
No, I do too. So I'm like, I'm skipping the first marriage.
is
I'm just going to
insane.
go right into my second marriage. If I get married, like it'll be like in my 30s or 40s. And I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that.
It's true. I feel like, like I was saying with my girlfriend, we're in our mid 50s, so it's so different than when I was in my early 20s
Is
and
it
pushing
better?
to get married. Oh yeah, way
So
better.
There's like no
better.
pressure.
Because we've got, my girls are grown and gone. They live in different parts of the country. She's got one son that lives with her. She got a couple kids, but they're adults. And
Love
it is
that.
so different because we feel like we become who we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to be, the authentic selves, so it's a completely different game. Well, I was just going to say, we're running out of time. I hate to say this because we are actually hitting that magic 45-minute point. I don't want this to end, but we have to end it because this is the end of part 2. But what I was going to say to both of you, I was going to ask you, would you be interested in coming back in September? I do every month a MindShift podcast Zoom call, which is a closed group call. We have a number of people that drop in just to chat for an hour on a Sunday night. I would love to carry this conversation on if you are up for it.
People just drop in.
Yeah, well, it's the Patreon supporters of the show. So we have, a number of people that come in. We have an hour-long discussion. We just talk about anything, everything. It's a great chance for them to meet people that I've had on the show. So I would love to have you back on. Maybe we can pick up this discussion, have some other people weigh in on it too. So that would be great.
Yeah,
That would be super fun. Yeah, I'm interested.
Okay, I'll throw you some dates and we can figure it out.
Yeah. Clint, but before we end, one last thing, just for our listeners, because I know we talked about your book a little bit in our episode, but like, are you writing? Like, is your book coming out? Are you finished writing it?
Yeah,
I'm finished writing it. I've been editing it incredibly hard. It's insane how hard it is to edit a book over and over and over.
I bet.
It's about 99.9% done editing wise. I'm hoping to release it on Amazon. I've got some friends helping me publicize it and things like that to get it released sort of in the right categories and things like that. It's going to come out as a Kindle version first, and I'm going to work on getting it as a paperback, and then I want to do it as an Audible version as well. So, yeah, it's called Baptism, Third Time's a Charm, and it's hopefully coming out end of September. So
do you have a mailing list or a pre-order list or something like that people can join?
Yeah, I'm working on that. I've gotten different advice. Someone said don't do pre-sales, so I need to look into that and see if that's a better strategy. So I need to hit my marketing targets before I release the book. But yeah, that's my goal. I've got another book that's a sequel to that I'm working on as well. Kind of picks up where this one ends after my third baptism. So yeah, there's some stuff in the pipeline for sure, which I'm really excited about.
That's awesome.
The other thing I was going to ask you, what's your sort of social media handle? What's the best way to find you online?
You can find us pretty much on every Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook, but everything's at Cheers to Leaving. Just you search that, you should
Easiest
be able to
way
find
to
us.
find you.
Yeah, and on Facebook.
Yeah, we also have a link tree in our bio on Instagram as well, if that would be easier.
And our Facebook, it's not a page, it's a group. So it's
a
Cheers to
group.
Leaving support group. So it's basically like our podcast conversation group, discussion group.
And we have a link for that in every single one of our show notes as well. We have probably over 500 people in it. And,
that's great.
It's growing.
It's helpful just to post your shit that other people understand and continue. I mean, continually you're working through this still. So
there's so much we could have talked about. I wanted to get into more stuff, but maybe we can get into that in September if you're willing to come back on. So thank you so much, Rachael and Molly. I've absolutely loved doing part 1 and part 2. I look forward to doing something more in the future.
Looking forward to it.
For having us.
Thank you.